Hi, I'm Jennifer Sir from the Sewing Room. Over the next few weeks, I will show you how to do different kinds of seams. And seams are really important because they're the foundation of what makes up your garment. We want to make sure our seams are stable and that they're pretty. So sometimes having them look as nice on the inside as it does on the outside makes a huge difference in the way you feel about your garment. So let's get started and sew some seams. Let's learn how to do a French seam. French seams are great for sheer fabrics and very lightweight fabrics. Now we're going to sew a French seam, and a French seam is really good for sheer fabrics, and that's why I have 2 pieces of silk organza here. So we'll just assume that we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to start by putting the wrong sides together first. You heard me correct, wrong sides together. Match up those edges, and we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam. We have a 1/2 inch total seam allowance, but we're going to use a 1/4 inch seam for the first one. Again, I'm using contrasting thread, and the contrasting thread will help you see where the seam is, but normally you would use matching thread. And with lighter weight fabrics, you also want to use a smaller needle. I usually use somewhere between a size 8 and a size 10 needle when I'm sewing sheer fabrics. We have this nice 1/4 inch seam right now, and what I'm going to do is I'll quickly just press it flat with the iron. And what that pressing does is it sort of just gels the 2 threads together a little bit. And then I'm going to trim my seam allowance to 1/8 of an inch. Now for bridal, I would start with a seam allowance and get as small as a 1/16 of an inch, but that's really when you're really trying to make a tiny little seam, and it's very difficult. So I recommend start with a 1/4 inch and then cut off an 1/8 of an inch, so you have an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you're going to press that seam open. So that can seem kind of tricky, so occasionally what I will do is just try to finger press it first, just to get it started. And then I'll press it with the iron. So here you can see my pressed open seam, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'll fold it flat so that seam is right on the edge, and we'll press that with the iron. So here we have our seam with the right sides together finally, but you can see the seam allowance is tucked right inside. And now we're going to stitch a 1/4 of an inch again. Now we're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam, a very skinny 1/4 inch, 1/4 of an inch seam, to close up our seam and conceal all of the raw edges. And there we have our French seam. And as you can see, it completely encloses all of the raw edges in the seam. It's really great for sheer fabrics and also for really lightweight fabrics.